My name is Dr. Luanga Elizabeth Nanziri, the Director of the African Center for Development Finance at the University of Stellenbosch Business School. We have just had our annual Development Finance Forum, a flagship event for the center. This year, the event was focused on youth entrepreneurship and how development finance institutions can invest impactfully. This event is important because it brings together all our stakeholders in the development finance fraternity. Besides representatives from the development finance institutions, the event featured the youths themselves, futurists to give us a landscape of the youth and investments on the continent, as well as practitioners with a series of tools and instruments that can be used to reach out to the youths.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, and it is a pleasure to join you and my esteemed colleagues for this second annual Development Finance Forum at the Business School at Stellenbosch University. So indeed, for my brief inputs, my purpose is to share and shape a bit of the landscape of youth entrepreneurs towards triggering a discussion and conversation here on how development finance institutions may respond innovatively and invest for sustained impacts. And you mentioned some very interesting and pertinent questions, Elizabeth. I don't want to spend too much time highlighting the numbers or reporting on statistics. My panelists joining here have a wealth of knowledge from their areas of expertise that they will share on, and I will allow them to enlighten us here. And also, I do trust that hopefully within the community of participants for this forum, academics, development finance institutions, youth entrepreneurs, and others that are interested in this subject area, that we do have some cognizance of what the key issues are through our work, through our experience and our exposure. And certainly, I don't want to recap and dwell on what is already known. I would want for my value and my brief inputs added here today to pinpoint a few interrelated specific issues that are important to consider in seeking to understand the landscape of youth entrepreneurs and development finance in Africa. And further, Elizabeth, I would like to be goal-oriented and in my remarks to focus on the futures we would like to shape and attain to, how we may realize these futures, what steps and actions do we need to take. We have helpful visions in the UN SDGs, the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and in the African Union Agenda 2063 aspirations for an Africa we want. We have aspirations for futures of economic prosperity and sustainability, with women and youth equally integrated, participating and contributing, and of course as well celebrating our culture and heritage. But how do we get there? Suffice it to say that there are several challenges for youth entrepreneurs, some of them being business skills, access to financing, the vehicles and instruments of investments and financing, and how they reach these beneficiaries. And yet there is consensus that this grouping of actors, these agents, are vital in propelling communities and countries across the African region into these futures of prosperity, sustainability, and well-being for all that we aspire to. Africa has the largest youth population in the world. 60% of our youth are between the ages of 15 to 24, and in 2 decades, it is expected that our population of youth will begin to make up the majority of the world's workforce into the next century, so into the 22nd century. And additionally, looking into the capital and investment field, I would argue that it's widely acknowledged globally we live in a capital abundant world. Distribution of capital, but also of services, goods, data, talent, information. This is where the conundrums lie. And these are emotive issues as well. If we follow some of the recent billionaire debates, this is a good example of this. There is finance available, but how do we link this opportunity to potential? And how do we ensure that our youth entrepreneurs, signaled as key agents of development and advancement for the continent, have access to this very necessary support in order to push their initiatives forward? The first issue I would like to highlight in shaping this landscape is data and the need for data. Our data collection, storage, transfer, application systems desperately need improvements. We don't have accurate numbers of youth entrepreneurs across the continent. Neither is there data on their performance, liquidity, assets, equipment, their challenges. We don't have a clear picture of what financing needs are. We know where the shortcuts are, and I'll speak to these in a minute. And I know that there are efforts to address the data short gap across the continent. The African Union has a statistics harmonization strategy, working closely with national statistics offices to improve data collection and our understanding of the context within which we govern. There is also an active youth network across the continent that's working very hard to make youth initiatives visible across industries and sectors. And there are also various initiatives targeted at data collection, also at industry-specific levels. At the Institute for Futures Research, we have been supporting an initiative of virtual reality, VR and XR specialists in painting the picture of their businesses in Africa, as well as working with some creatives in trying to shape an understanding of what the creative industries on the continent look like. And each of these reports are driven by the entrepreneurs working in these fields and understanding that there's a gap even for themselves in terms of visibility of their initiatives, their needs, and where they would like to go. Secondly, I would like to highlight the need to change our frames. So beyond data availability and data use challenges, we need to examine how we're interpreting the data and information that's available to us. What insights are we gaining? Towards what ends are these insights applied? So for instance, we do know that 1 in 5 youth are not in employment, education, or training. However, I would like to provoke us into thinking around what are the indicators and criteria that we apply in order for us to get the whole picture of what youth on the continent are doing. So when we say they're not in education, we mean formal education. But where else are the sites of education that youth are accessing, and how may we better have visibility of these and the impacts of these sites of education, if we can agree to make them valid? We say they're not in employment, but have we truly made visible the initiatives within the informal economy? We say they're not in training, but have we made visible the community sites of application, which is often where we will find youth innovation in environments of scarcity and often at the periphery and margin of where we sometimes direct our formal focus? And we can agree that the youth are resilient. Their numbers are demonstrative of this. There is an increase and not a decline. Youth-headed households are an excellent indicator. So if we follow the path of this resilience to its source, what will we find? What will the data show us about what youth are doing, where innovation is left, and indeed where capital is most needed and yet inaccessible? And there's need, finally, in my last point that I would like to highlight, for creativity and the focus on innovation that this forum is driving. Indeed, necessity breeds invention, and there's a desperate need for creative solutions. We just convened a colloquium within the Institute for Futures Research where we were discussing the role of creativity and some of the challenges of introducing creativity to conventional, conservative spaces such as the policy space, but also in business and in finance. So beyond training and integrating youth to current systems and processes as they exist, we do need to consider the ways in which we can enhance our systems and processes, from languages we use to the requirements that we ask the youth entrepreneurs to fulfill, tools of access, reporting and measurements for us to gain a sense of performance and deliverables, timeframes, indicators of success, and returns of investment. And I do believe that the world of technology and what we're seeing with digitization is beginning to offer excellent opportunities for us to experiment more with how some of these conservative institutions, policy spaces may shape more innovative approaches to reach their target audiences, their markets, and their beneficiaries. And indeed, the importance of collaborating with other actors and thinking together in painting this landscape. It's a broad landscape if we look about youth entrepreneurs across the diversity of the industries on the continent. And it's a broad landscape if we look at the development finance institutions that are interested in supporting this latent potential on the continent. How do we ensure that we are linking up intelligently with the different comparative advantages that we offer in order to ensure we are indeed investing for impact? My main contributions, Elizabeth, are that in viewing the landscape, we need to gather more data, and then we need to alter the focus of our lenses so that we can better make sense and better be aware of what the landscape is telling us in terms of the initiatives that are happening by youth entrepreneurs, and where can development finance institutions best interject for sustainability and impact. So if we can better understand the landscape through more nuanced sense making, and we can therefore broaden the stage of emergence for relevant solutions and fitting approaches. I hope our discussions with the panelists will open up some of these conversations.
We also had insights into how DFIs can invest sustainably and with impact.
The main role of development finance institutions like ourselves is to address market failure. We believe that youth unemployment and underemployment constitutes a central challenge and is actually representative of a market failure. The expectation is that Africa's young population is going to increase to a staggering 850 million by 2050. Presenting a tsunami of the problem for the governments. The continent's economic growth has not created enough jobs, leaving 83% of the 18 million youth that enter the job market in sub-Saharan Africa every year jobless. The failure to harness the potential of Africa's youth as a powerful engine and demographic dividend leads to significant losses and poses a threat for sustainable development. The tax revenue base that the governments have in the continent cannot carry the social and service demands that will lead to constrained fiscus with unmanageable fiscal deficits. The situation also poses significant socio-political risks, including triggers of unrest, attraction to the promises of insurgency movements and jihadists. So we saw recent unrest in South Africa where youth were at the forefront, urbanization and migration in search for jobs and economic opportunities, which creates its own issues. Now, if we look at what has gone wrong with past and current interventions, we believe that youth employment interventions have been fragmented, focusing only on one aspect of the situation. Often, the focus is on supply-side challenges, and it ignores the demand challenges that impede job creation and challenges in linking potential employers and relevant employees together effectively. Many interventions do not fully consider the needs and desires of youth. Oftentimes, these programs do not involve youth in their design. They are only seen as recipients of assistance rather than active players. There is also ongoing fragmentation of efforts amongst various actors. For example, we were doing some research and we came across there are 70 different programs in South Africa alone focusing on enterprise development. And these programs do not talk to each other. The lack of investment, affordable access to finance, and quality business development services are also holding young people back from fulfilling their entrepreneurial potential. Through stakeholder consultations, research, and diagnostic, AFDB has found that it appears that the ecosystem of support around young entrepreneurs is vibrant but fragmented, with duplication of programs limiting the potential impact. So this multiplicity of these programs actually leaves the young people confused on the direction they need to follow in their journey ahead. So based on these, I'll just provide some thought about the development finance strategies going forward. So the idea is to design inclusive programs with youth in mind, taking into account, number one, the spectrum and diversity within this group. From the incredibly sophisticated technology-savvy people like Najeri, who have seen it all and have been exposed to it all since early childhood, and also concerned about the environment, To the youth who are growing up in the rural areas of the least developed countries, where economic opportunities are scarce and exposure to technology is rather limited. Hence, programs have to be innovative enough to keep the techno-savvy youth engaged while bridging the gap to accommodate the less savvy youth that comes from a lower base. Therefore, there is a need for development of vocational programs to accommodate unskilled labor force, as well as programs to stimulate and support non-traditional employment for absorbing the incredibly techno-savvy young people in agrotech, fintech, green economy, gaming, and all the new economy industries. Building on lessons learned from historical as well as current interventions and the bank's strengths, the AFDB has developed the Jobs for Youth strategy, which takes an ecosystem approach by addressing the full range of youth employment challenges, deploying a variety of interventions, and convening partners from across the continent. This strategy addresses the demand challenges by creating greater economic opportunities for youth across socio-economic strata, rural-urban divides, and gender and age groups, supply challenges by supporting regional member countries in private sector-centric human capital development, equipping youth with skills that position them for the jobs of tomorrow, and linkage challenges to better connect youth to economic opportunities. This strategy is mainstreamed into each of the bank's high five strategies. So bank has 5 priority areas, each with its own strategy, taking into account natural reduction in jobs that may result from advances in technology, climate change, and globalization. Taking example of Feed Africa strategy, which focuses on the agriculture sector, Jobs for Youth focuses on the development of micro enterprises that fill gaps in prioritized value chains, provides human capital to fuel the growth of agro-industrial companies in prioritized value chains, makes investments that enhance agricultural job creation and skills development in prioritized value chains. To support this strategy, the bank is also in the process of developing a regional enterprise development digital platform that focuses on strengthening the youth entrepreneurship ecosystem by linking young and youth enterprises to the relevant support at each phase of development, forward linkages to market and backward linkages to input suppliers. Just to talk about the thought process, the network, the platform aims that through a mobile application, a young smallholder farmer in rural Zimbabwe with limited internet coverage network shall be able to log into this digital platform and navigate the regional entrepreneurship ecosystem. The entrepreneur will be able to connect to the most appropriate business support services and receive mentorship and coaching. Through the life cycle of his business, he or she will be linked to financial service providers and have access to local and regional markets. A similar regional platform, which is called Sukal Tanmia, has been implemented successfully by the bank in Northern Africa region with tremendous impact and success. The bank has also developed a project to promote and develop the fashion sector in Africa. This is called Fashionomics Africa, which is an online platform to show young designers from the continent and provide a marketplace for their products. The bank is also in the conceptual phase of designing youth enterprise investment banks, which will provide access to finance to different level of youth enterprises, linking them with the country ecosystems. So as you can see, the bank has multiplicity of approaches to address this challenge, which is ubiquitous and ever growing. But of course, we cannot do this alone, and we need support from all like-minded partners, including yourselves, as well as regional member countries, to take this challenge head on. I thank you.
One of the highlights of the discussion was the fact that DFIs are going beyond making finance available for youths. They're taking a comprehensive approach to making sure the youths acquire the right skills to access the finances that are available to them.
Let me share some views that have developed over the last couple of years specifically, where I think we have a movement in the world that is starting to mature and to shape, and I think that will bring quite seismic shifts in the near future to how the young entrepreneur, the youth, can benefit from technology, but also from evolving and different economic and governance models that come with this. Yeah. I'm also very privileged that through the work that we're doing at Vodacom, where, as you mentioned, I've been working in the ventures and partnership space. We are doing things differently to our own evolution at Vodacom. And that means that the good work that the colleagues have done in the last 10, 15 years, pioneering things like mobile money, pioneering things like general communication solutions to the rest of the continent and connecting everyone, basically set the basis and the infrastructure for a lot of the things that we are doing now, where we're really busy with very innovative projects that help small-scale farmers, subsistence farmers, and young entrepreneurs across the continent to use digital products and to use all sorts of innovation to become more efficient, to have access, whether that's education, knowledge, or to markets, etc. So I'm sharing some of my sort of views learned through this exciting project work that we're doing there, as well as some personal views along the line, and the insights gained through engaging with an emerging complete new movement, as I said. And what I mean by that is that the traditional way of doing things and of providing access to any sort of support, funding, finance, as we heard from my colleagues Niraj and Jerry before, comes with a lot of challenges. I do think by now it's clear that today's world of providing and trying to support the youth on their growth path, especially in Africa, whether it's the data problem that Jerry mentioned, or whether it's, let me say, the systemic and institutional inefficiency. Yeah, there's a lot of players on that intersection that are required in today's world to provide any sort of support. And that is where, for a couple of years now, there are a lot of people worldwide who are dreaming the dream and have the purpose to make these things easier. And that is, of course, underpinned by technology. I find so far the best term to describe that movement for me is the Web3 word, because what it means is that there are people who want to change technology, want to change the internet, the access to it, and how technology is used and how it's actually democratized. And what you find in this Web3 world are people who build complete new blockchain-based solutions and networks, not for speculative purposes, not for crazy enrichment stories, but basically to create complete new infrastructures where in a direct, in a peer-to-peer, in a non-custodial way, in a censor-resistant way, in a very cheap and fast way, people can exchange value. People can build their own economic identities. People can self-manage their own data. They can decide how to monetize it and with whom. And they're in control of their own identity, their personal identity, their economic identity, as well as building one. So that is maybe to give some context to where I said, I think somewhere on the agenda, we have the point that where I was narrowing down into decentralized finance, speaking about how this emerging world that is a central part of this world of Web3 called decentralized finance is completely changing the game and is allowing people to have very, very economically and fast access to exchange value on a micro level without any intermediaries. You have dozens of wallets nowadays that allow you to send microtransactions around the world in seconds, settled with finality and at a fraction of the cost that anything in the conventional banking and financial system allows you to do that. Yeah. I'd like to give you an example. I've been very privileged to work with within the ecosystem and engage a lot of the people around a blockchain network that's called Celo. That's built specifically with mobile users in mind. That's specifically for emerging markets, and that is specifically there to help people gain access to economic opportunities and to transact freely, directly, and cheaply. And they're achieving that. Yeah, they're an open network. Everyone can join them. Everyone here on the call can acquire their token, the Celo, and can participate in the governance. And all the various products they're putting on top of their network that allows the exchange of value. So simple and easy from one wallet to another is able to do so instantly. You're exchanging microtransactions for a very small fraction of a dollar. We're talking about 0.001 cents here. And they put that to the test. There are very exciting pilots happening as we speak here on the continent. I'll give you an example for that, how that can support the youth entrepreneur. They are working with various organizations, for instance, in Kenya, and they have piloted something where an international organization is offering the opportunity for microtasks. And young entrepreneurs are participating in that. But it's very challenging if you're in Kenya and you need to be paid in shillings, but you have an international company that can only pay in US dollars. So how can you achieve that? The Celo blockchain and the Celo team provided the solution basically by using their stablecoin, the Celo dollar, so that you're not subject to any fluctuations, etc. And you can now pay, and that is happening. You can pay people for microtasks, $3, $5, $10, and they're able to convert that and use existing other partners in that exciting ecosystem who have integrated that and allow you the conversion to Kenyan shillings and get that straight into your mobile wallet, use it for mobile money, etc. So these are the kind of innovations that we need to look at. It's peer-to-peer, it's direct, it's non-custodial. And of course, the things I'm saying here already indicate that there is a couple of challenges, because adoption, of course, is very much at the beginning. And that is where conventional players, such as ourselves, such as big banks, big agri companies, etc., are coming into the picture, because ultimately there's a lot of trust that has still to be gained for these decentralized finance options. There's a lot of customer experience that needs to become better, the consumerization of the entire space, so that in the end we see these technologically superior solutions to flourish. And I think we are at the kind of verge now where the blockchain Web3 world that provides the technology and the infrastructure to do things better, faster, and cheaper is now at the gate of the enterprise and the big corporate world, and is getting the attention to say, how can we work with you to make these things happen? And of course, the field is a lot wider than I'm able to sort of sketch in these few minutes that I have now here, and I'm sure I've already ran over, because there are lending opportunities, the way how lending works, the way how people build their economic identities. Yeah, I do want to mention, if I can, please, one last project that is very, very exciting. There's a team from BankU. They've been very successful and doing very exciting work, especially also in Africa, they're focusing on supply chain management. They work with big companies and they're focused on providing the solution for big companies to integrate waste pickers, smallholder farmers, etc., into their supply chain, formally engage with them, and make it possible for them to build their economic identity, become credit worthy, and be able to be paid for what they're doing.
The third highlight relates to responsible investments. At the business school, we focus on responsible leadership. From these discussions, we learned that we can take this a step further and speak about responsible investments, that is, investing with impact beyond investing just for returns.
Thank you to our previous speakers. Thank you to all those who joined us today, listening to this great conversation shared from key experts from different industries and with different ideas. I think I don't need to reintroduce myself, but I would just like to go straight to the point, just so that we are on the same page. Youth entrepreneurship is really a passion that I've developed for quite some time. I strongly believe that the only way Africa is going to get out of to alleviate poverty is through entrepreneurship. If we embrace entrepreneurship. As you all know, as most youth or most aspiring entrepreneurs or even investors, just like Vij and Phil said, the problem is really not finance. The problem is not money. But we all know that most innovative startups and SMEs in developing and transition countries often have great ideas, but most of these ideas are not fine-tuned to a stage where they can attract outside funding. According to the outcome of a panel conversation that we had called the State of Startup Investment Readiness in Africa, it was hosted in 2018. And the panelists were mostly investors, and they emphasized that the case in Africa is really perceived of lack of investment readiness of innovative startups to be in a position where they can compete for and take on outside equity. The most common reasons for a lack of investment readiness include a reluctance of entrepreneurs to surrender a partial ownership and control of their business, lack of knowledge about the availability of external sources of finance, low investability of business development propositions, a lack of understanding about the key factors investors look for in making investment decisions, and presentations failing such as deficiencies in pitches. So again, the problem is not that we don't have finance. I mean, I'm really excited that Mr. Vich was here from the Development Bank of African Development Bank. They've been doing an exceptional work in making sure that entrepreneurs are really supported across the continent. People like some of us as our organization, we're really proud to see that we have, as much as we push this vision, this agenda of entrepreneurship by 2063, we have great support from people like them. But to add to the fact that money is really not a problem, I would like to give you some statistics on how much funding that was raised into the startup ecosystem in Africa over the last 3 years. And as we know, what the pandemic has done, but trust me, the startup ecosystem raised over $1 billion in half quarter of 2021. And if you look at 2019, we have over $454 million that was raised, that came into our continent. And in 2020, we have 531 million that was injected into the African startup ecosystem. And we're talking again, just see in the first quarter of 2021, we have about $1.36 billion dollars that has been injected within the startup ecosystem. I would like to give, a thumbs up to our women who have stepped up, female founders who have stepped up from 6% in 2019 to almost 40% in 2021. And if we talk about the big four, those who've benefited hugely within this budget or this funding. You have Nigeria topping the list, you have Kenya, you have South Africa, and you have Egypt. But you have other African countries that are coming up as well. This is just to tell you that the state of our entrepreneurship ecosystem among the youth is really, really growing, but we need more. I think Mr. Vij, even Dr. Jerry said it, that partnership is key. And with what the African Development Bank is doing, it's something that we really need to push that kind of a partnership and collaboration. We asked what are the types of businesses that African entrepreneurs are engaging. I will give you some percentage and sectors of businesses that survived after 3 years. As you all know, that 25% of businesses fail in the first year, 36% fail the year 2, and 44% fail after year 3. So what type of businesses, what type of business and the sector, and what percentage do we have? You have you have information, you have about 37%, you have transportation and communication, you have 45%, you have retail, 47%, which is really good. You have construction, you have 47% as well. You have manufacturing, you have 49%. You have mining, that's good, you have 51%. You have wholesale, 54%. Services, for other services, have 55%. Agriculture is really, really taking a leap with 56%. Education, which I mentioned earlier on, and health spaces are taking 56%. But on top of the list is financial, insurance, and real estate. Those are the common businesses that Africa are really, really engaged. But when we come back into how can we not, if we are really, really into these spaces, and how can we ameliorate this percentage? I think the answer lies within what Mr. Vij said, and that's something that from us, our organization set up a startup, we have been working on since the last 2 to 3 years, is understanding the problems that entrepreneurs are facing. And we learn, and after our research, realize that the problem is not the money, just to accord with Mr. Vij, but the problem is the fact that we lack entrepreneurial education. We lack investment readiness approaches and processes. We do not understand that. We cannot be expecting funding from investors, and we are not ready. We are not ready for it. I always say that opportunities meet readiness. So if you're not ready, then you can have access to those investments. So what have we done to make entrepreneurship more accessible, to make entrepreneurship easier, to also make sure that we have so many startups that get investment, so many startups that can protect the investment that like the banks or the DFIs are protecting, or investors are putting in there, just so that they don't fall within the first 3 years of their business. What as an organization have we done? We've developed and launched an investment readiness and entrepreneurship education digital platform, a platform that can be accessed through either virtually or face-to-face, and this platform can connect, investors can connect onto it to look for deals, mentors can connect into it to support entrepreneurs, startup themselves. We just call it a marketplace where that connect investors, mentors to more opportunity. But more importantly, this platform helps entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, educate them on their journey from how to start, grow, and scale their businesses. And this is one of the critical issues that we have been facing. Entrepreneurship education, or education across Africa, has limited us with a lot of things. And we decided to create a program that people can use within a short space of time. A program that anyone at any given moment, any stage of their business can join, depending on what they are struggling with. If you are at the startup phase, then this program, the first 3 modules are for you. If you are at a stage where you built an MVP or a minimal marketable product, an AMP, then this program is also for you to then help you understand what you need from a market perspective, what you need from a sales perspective. Where are you in your business, and what are you looking for? But the beauty about our platform is that it helps entrepreneurs to prepare for what they call a due diligence. This is what most investors are looking for. It takes between 48 to 72 hours, 42 or 72 months to put together that package. In other words, I call it in other words, to put this documentation that investors are looking for before they invest in your business.
This platform provides an opportunity for collaborative research between the business school and the development finance fraternity.
I know a lot of people talk about hard commercial numbers, but when we talk of impact, we talk about the heart of finance. And that is appreciating one fundamental fact. And the fundamental fact is, when you do business, you want to do business in a sustainable way and for the long term. But if you focus only on the commercials of the business that you do, the likelihood is that you're not going to be in business for too long. And that is the concept of impact. And what impact says is, anybody who deploys capital, allocates capital, or invests, firstly thinks about the impact or the effect that they want to have on the society in which they operate, before they think about the return. And this reverses the ideology or the psyche that is sitting in a traditional boardroom, where in a traditional boardroom, the first question you ask yourself is, how do I maximize return? Once I've maximized return, how do I then help society? And this for me is the fundamental difference between the two thought processes. And a lot of people have always argued that, how can you do it? It is not possible. I can count a number of organizations, innovative organizations that have done it. Google is one of them. Tata is another. You can go on with your list. These are organizations that go into the market with the first objective of solving social problems. And out of solving social problems, they then deal with their return. Now, in the South African context, you asked me to talk about impact investing post-COVID. One needs to understand what you're trying to solve for. What has COVID done? And what is very clear to us is that COVID has weakened growth, raised unemployment and poverty, deepened inequality, and created an environment of social instability. An unfortunate situation there is the biggest group that has been affected by COVID are the youth and the women. And if you want to respond properly, you need to make sure that you respond to deal with these two groups. And an impact investor is going to say, this picture that I'm reading is too unsustainable, and I cannot walk away from it because I'm thinking it's too risky. But what I am going to do as an impact investor is investing right to solve the imbalances that have been generated by COVID, so that I am in business for 2 generations. The traditional investor will quickly walk away because the risks are too high and wait for somebody to de-risk the environment before they put in more capital. Now, to answer your question specifically, how do I know I'm investing right or I'm investing with impact? There are 3 broad areas that we need to think about as South Africa. as we think about investing or dealing with issues of impact. The first area of consideration is that of improving quality of life. If you don't improve quality of life, you are actually escalating your risks of doing business in society. Secondly, is ensuring that as you invest, you generate new opportunities for players in the market, in particular the youth and women. And lastly, you invest for economic resilience. There is no point in investing for growth if when you hit a snag, you are not resilient enough to go back to your previous peak. That is the way in which we need to think about how we manage ourselves as investors in society. But we need to think about this thing in 3 stages or at 3 levels, because COVID almost ravages your abilities and you almost have to start afresh. It's like rebuilding a garden or a rose garden. And these stages are identified as the emergency stage, the recovery stage, and the resilience stage. And each one of these will require different sources of capital. For the first stage, the typical requirement is for social capital from government. For the second and the third stages, we expect the private sector to take leadership. We cannot hope government to take the turnaround to the second and the third stage. But coming back to the discussion that you've just had about capital, whether it's adequate, whether it's there or not, go and ask the ANC government in South Africa today, and you'll get the right answer. At the time when South Africa crafted the National Development Plan, there was no need for financial capital into the plan. So the plan comes without a budget. And the reason being, at that stage, the biggest constraint for South Africa was economic management and governance. Finance was not an issue. But today, finance is an issue. For the first time in the history of finance, both the Keynesians and the monetarists agree that to solve the COVID problem, you need money. In the past, you would have had a split of views. So what that means is that money is a problem today. And the more important than that is that the intermediation of that money is the biggest weakness in our economy. By financial institutions, by government, and by state-owned enterprises. If you reduce that thinking to the individual level, go and ask an average South African who's lost a job, who wants to start a business, or who's been in business and lost their business because of COVID, and whether they are able to raise capital to get back into business. The answer is very stark. So the debate about whether there's adequate capital or not, I think needs to be looked at in much more detail. An institution like the African Development Bank is a very fortunate institution in our equation, in that it has the credibility and the sovereign support to raise capital anywhere it wants to raise capital. But its challenge is, how does it intermediate that capital to make sure that we realize our SDGs and NDP requirements? To realize the turnaround of the economy, we can no longer rely on government. We now need to rely on the role of the private sector. Private sector being the providers of the impact capital, being the providers of the institutions that are going to allow us to deliver. The B4SA strategy is the strategy that we need to be supporting, is a strategy that the African Development Bank needs to be directing resources towards if we're going to resolve our problems.
The focus of this year's forum was on youth entrepreneurship and how development finance institutions can be relevant to this group. This is because up to 60% of Africa's population is between the age of 19 to 24 years, And 1 in 5 is either unemployed, uneducated, or not in training. And this has implications for Africa's economic growth and development.
Invitation, you asked me to talk about the role of DFIs in sustainability. And I think I'd like to kind of reflect on the conversation from that perspective. I've been on the board of the DBSA for 7-8 years now, and I'm the current chair. And we've gone through quite a fundamental change in the last couple of years, like many DFIs. And I think the role of a DFI, just kind of linking back to the ADB discussion, and then I'll connect to some of the conversations. I mean, the role of a DFI is best summed up as mission-oriented finance. So it's finance that does exactly what Elias is talking about. It also has to reduce risk, and in that way allow the private sector to enter where they would not normally enter because of the risk. The third is long-termist investing, and then the fourth is DFIs are often policy instruments of their government. So within that context, you're absolutely right. We're now faced in the world with a fundamental transition, and this is the energy transition. So the total investment in renewable energy now has breached the $300 billion mark. That is double total investment in fossil fuels and nuclear combined. And so what we have is an energy revolution underway. And this creates huge opportunities. So just to link to earlier discussions, I invited a young entrepreneur to come and talk to the board. His name is Tumi Lee from Ushiri Holdings. And his argument was he wants to move into the green space because it's the best opportunity for him as a young Black entrepreneur, because white capital has not consolidated itself there. Mature traditional capital has not consolidated itself in this new space. So if you look at spaces where new entrepreneurs can emerge and have the greatest opportunity to build capital rapidly, it would be in the ICT type sector, which Fritz has been talking about, but also in the renewable energy sector. And these two sectors are now converging. And when you realize that convergence is taking place on a continent where you have the fastest urbanization rates in the world. Currently, there's 400 million people living in cities in Africa. It's projected to more than double to 1.2 billion in the next 4 decades. And it's a youth-dominated urban culture which has underpinned the 40 or so uprisings that we've seen on the African continent over the last decade and a half. And so this is a mobilized youth population that is looking for opportunities in new economies. And in the context of a world where basically you can no longer find finance for investments in fossil fuels, and you can find a lot of cheap finance for investment in renewable energy and green infrastructures. And all of that is impossible without the kind of ICT blockchain kind of intermediation that is necessary for your decentralized energy system. This is a fantastic opportunity. For the threats that DFIs face is that we sit on stranded assets. In the DBSA, we have 20 billion, a fifth of our book, a quarter of our book invested in ESCO. And those assets, many of those assets are stranded assets. But you can't get out. So you have to compensate that with the new sets of assets that have to be constructed. We have to build 5 gigawatts per annum in South Africa every single year for the next 30 or 40 years. And for every gigawatt you build, you're creating 10,000 jobs. That's a massive, massive opportunity, way beyond anything we've ever seen since 1994. And that's where a lot of young entrepreneurs are starting to gravitate. And as a development finance institution, what we have to do is say, one, we are prepared to take a lower return on investment, a lower ROI. We're prepared to be long-termist. We're prepared to support Black entrepreneurs with their equity positions, either in building their own companies like Green Pele, Pele Green Energy, or buying equity into existing or taking over existing infrastructure companies. So that's the kind of thinking that is needed. But what has been missing in South Africa up until now is this concept of blended finance. So we've had public finance in investments, which haven't done too well, and hence the disintegration of a lot of our SOEs. And on the other hand, we've had private sector investment, which has been shy. I agree with those that there's been a capital strike for quite some time. But when you start bringing public sector finance, like DFI finance, into blended finance vehicles, like the infrastructure fund that we've set up, that allows for the public sector to take higher risk, that enables the private sector to come in on a joint basis, and that in turn allows for the large-scale investments in infrastructures that are required if we're going to address our problems. But that's not nearly good enough on its own, and not enough people, I think, in government understand that. We have to accept that the higher risk, smaller scale investments in local innovation hubs, the kind of ecosystems that have been discussed here. We've got a new program of investing in what we call D-Labs to kind of build township economies. Those kinds of investments have high transaction costs because it's small amounts, lots of processing, high transaction costs, institutionally very risky, highly conflictual, and you need a new set of skills that are not normally employed in development finance institutions to handle those kinds of things. But that's where the interface comes in between development finance and entrepreneurialism in those kinds of initiatives. We need a lot more of that. DFIs in general across the African continent, including traditionally the DBS have preferred large infrastructure investments, large transactions, because your transaction cost as a percentage of the total are minuscule. And that is problematic. That has to change. So yeah, I think one more point that I'd make is, which I think relates to a lot of what's being said here, which is a lot of what is being said here is dependent on building the kinds of institutions that can underpin and support the indigenous innovations that McKibben is talking about and others. How we draw on African knowledge, how we draw on African relationality, especially amongst the urban youth, in a way that results in institution building. And I don't think we have an adequate theory of institution building in the African continent. We're too influenced, I think, on organizational development templates drawn from elsewhere, and those contexts are different to ours. And I haven't heard enough of sufficient references to what's our theory of institutions and the appropriate kinds of institutions that can underpin the kinds of dreams that we have in this conversation.
Very much, Dr. Nziri, and profound thanks on behalf of the advisory board of the ACDF to all our speakers and even to the director as represented by Professor Maes, and also for the participants in terms of the questions asked. If we look back to what Dr. Nziri started us with in terms of data, and also viability of the data, Mr. Vich also gave us the clarity in terms of the works of the African Development Bank and all the platforms that are existing. We saw how much Mr. Milosdek raised all the issues in terms of blockchain, the bureaucratic challenges, and the innovations that are happening in terms of the peer-to-peer business platforms that are coming up. Thank you, Mr. Elias, for reminding us of the real essence of investing. You flipped the investing decision pyramid. And Mr. Ayaba, thank you for the data. You gave us some real data and things happening in the field. Professor, I agree with Professor, because as I was listening to all the discussions, I was like, okay, what's the literacy level in Africa? And what is the percentage in terms of inclusion in all the conversations that we're talking about? And how do you really make real transformations by adding even the moms and the pops and putting them in the mix, such that as their children go to school and come back, they will take over and be the entrepreneurs of tomorrow? And what is the impact of COVID on education? How it has affected all of us, and how does that affect entrepreneurship and the youth in Africa? For us at the ACDF, we would like to thank University of Stellenbosch for all the support. Thank you to the business school. And we know that ACDF is going to distill all these conversations further, and the proceedings will be on the ACDF website. And then also we'll be getting back to specific partners after this, before next year's event, such that by the time we come back next year, all being well, we'll have some milestones that we have covered. So we know that the ACDF does a lot of research, and some of the people that have logged in are former students, current students, faculty, and strategic institutions in Africa and multilateral agencies. So what are we going to do? We'll look forward to your partnership. You can partner with us. Some of the topics discussed here are actually worthy of further interrogation. At the end of it is to come out with policies. We heard from the ADB about misalignment of policies, issues of regulation, and the positions that the various governments will need to take, and the fact that the private sector need to be optimized as a partner. So ACDF is going to look forward to such partnerships, and we hope that when we come knocking on your doors, you would listen to us, and we're ready to partner and collaborate.
Based on the success of our inaugural forum in 2020 and the success of this year's forum, we look forward to our Development Finance Forum in 2022.